Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on an exploration of a topic that, well, it's often been at the heart of a lot of debates, some confusion, and honestly, some genuine heartfelt questions. We're talking about the intricate relationship between women and Islam. And these aren't just surface level things. They're, deep questions shaped by generations of different interpretations, sometimes misinformation and cultural views. We're really keen to get into them with you. Our guide for this deep dive is a really remarkable piece of work. It's excerpts from Women in Islam, Unveiling Paradoxical Truths. And specifically, it's based on an audio podcast book derived from Paradoxical Sajid, Vol. 1 by Arif Azad. And I have to say, what immediately stands out about Arif Azad's work is his courage, really, and the clarity he brings. He tackles these sensitive, significant subjects head on, doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
No, he really doesn't. And that's kind of our mission here today. It's not about us giving you the final definitive answers, that kind of just closes the book. Instead, we want to unpack the reasoning presented in this source material. We're trying to move beyond those surface assumptions and really uncover the nuanced perspectives Arif Azad brings out. It's about gaining knowledge, sure, but thoroughly, so you can form your own informed views. Arif Azad sets this scene for us. It's quite vivid, actually. Picture this: a modern university setting. There's a confident, clearly intelligent female student asking these incredibly sharp, direct questions to Sajid. Now, Sajid is the character representing this sort of thoughtful Islamic reasoning. Her voice is calm, the source says, but her words, they really cut through. She asks things like, why is a woman's testimony worth half of a man's in Islam? And why does she have to observe hijab, but a man doesn't?
Yeah, and the inheritance question, too.
Exactly. Why could she get less inheritance? And the big one, isn't Islam just inherently patriarchal?
Mm-hmm.
But what's compelling is Sajid. He doesn't dodge. He listens, like really listens, and then he starts to answer. That whole dynamic, the sincere question, met with a thoughtful response, that's really our guide today.
Okay, let's start right there then. That first pointed question from the student, this idea of a woman's testimony being half that of a man's. I mean, this comes up all the time. It's often seen as Exhibit A for inequality. How does Sajid tackle that?
Well, Sajid's immediate response, and this is crucial, is all about context. Context, context, context. He clarifies this specific rule applies only to a very, very narrow legal situation. Complex financial transactions. And to really get this, you have to think about 7th century Arabia. We're talking about large-scale trade, intricate contracts, caravan deals. This was overwhelmingly the domain of men back then.
Right, so women weren't typically involved in drawing up those kinds of complex business agreements.
Generally, no. Not in the public sphere, handling those specific kinds of disputes. So the ruling wasn't some judgment on a woman's intelligence or her value, not at all. It was about familiarity with the specific, often really complex financial details of the transaction being argued over. Practicality, essentially. And there's another layer to it. Arif Azad's source calls it a safeguard. In these specific financial cases, 2 women testify together. And the reasoning given is so one can gently remind the other if, say, a complex detail slips her mind because the deal was just so intricate.
Like a backup system.
Exactly. It's framed as a legal safeguard for accuracy in these high-stakes financial matters, not as an insult or a way of saying women are less capable. It's about practical support in a very specific legal setting.
That context is, well, it's usually left out, isn't it? But here's where it gets really interesting, as you hinted. Sajid points out this isn't a blanket rule.
Not even close. He makes it crystal clear that in many other legal situations, a woman's testimony stands completely on its own. It's accepted fully, without question.
Can you give us some examples from the source? Where does her word alone suffice?
Absolutely. The source is very specific here. In matters like, say, childbirth or nursing or issues really specific to women's bodies or experiences. Things men wouldn't have direct knowledge of a woman's testimony is not just valid, it's often the only relevant testimony. Her word alone is sufficient. It's considered primary evidence.
Wow, that completely reframes the narrative, doesn't it? It shows it's not about the woman herself, but the nature of the testimony and the context.
Precisely. It moves from a supposed general rule to a highly specific legal application.
So, for you listening, just take a moment. Think about how knowing the specific historical and legal context might shift your initial view on that half testimony point. It really shows why digging deeper matters, rather than just sticking with the headline. Okay, let's transition then. From legal testimony to finance. The student's next question: why do women inherit less? Another point that, understandably, raises eyebrows and feels unfair to many.
Right. And again, Sajid's approach is calm. Logical. He focuses on what the source presents as complementary financial roles within the Islamic framework. His explanation is this. In Islam, men bear the primary and legally binding financial responsibility for their families. A man must provide for his wife, his children, his parents if they need support, sometimes even other relatives like sisters.
And that's not just basic food and shelter.
No, it covers everything: healthcare, education, general upkeep. It's a significant ongoing financial obligation placed squarely on the man. Now, contrast that with the woman's financial situation according to this framework. She has zero financial obligation toward anyone, not her husband, not her children, nobody. Zero legal obligation.
Right.
Whatever she inherits, whatever she earns from her own work, any gift she gets is 100% hers. Completely hers to keep, spend, save, invest, whatever she wants. She has total financial independence and autonomy over her own wealth.
So she can contribute to the household if she wants to, but she doesn't have to.
Exactly. It's entirely her choice.
Yeah.
So when you put those two pieces together, the man's obligation versus the woman's non-obligation and full ownership.
It stops being about just more or less inheritance and isolation. It's not about valuing one person less, is it? It seems more about different roles and, I guess, different financial responsibilities within the whole system.
That's the argument presented. It's framed as being about equity fairness based on roles and responsibilities rather than strict identical sameness, a vital distinction the source makes.
Okay, let's pause on that too. For you listening, think about the practical side of this. Does understanding this structure, the defined male obligation alongside the woman's complete financial independence within it, change how you think about a woman's economic security or autonomy in this system? Interesting to compare to other models. All right, moving on. The next question is probably the most visible, the most emotionally charged one. Why do women have to cover the hijab? Often seen purely as restriction, but I know Sajid, through Arif Azad, offers a more philosophical take.
He does, and it's quite profound, actually. Starts with an analogy. Imagine a diamond. One is out in a public display case, maybe in a shop window. Another diamond, equally valuable, is kept securely in a safe. He then asks, which one is more protected? Which one's value is being more carefully guarded? The implication is pretty clear. The one kept safe.
Okay, so how does that relate to hijab?
The core idea presented is that hijab isn't about covering a woman because she's inherently shameful or needs hiding. Its position is the opposite. It's about protecting her dignity, her intrinsic worth, and, crucially, freeing her from what the source calls the constant societal pressure to display herself, to impress, to be constantly evaluated based on appearance consumed by the gaze.
The gaze. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, it refers to that external, often objectifying viewpoint that reduces people, particularly women in many societies, to just their physical appearance. It kind of detaches them from their intellect, their character, their actions. So hijab, in this view, is an act of liberation from that gaze.
Yeah.
It allows her worth to be seen in who she is, not just how she looks, shifting focus from the superficial to the substantial.
And this is where that often missed point comes in, right? Modesty isn't just for women in Islam.
Exactly. Arif Azad's source makes this very clear. The Quranic injunctions for modesty apply to both men and women. Men are also explicitly commanded to lower their gaze, meaning not staring or objectifying others, and to maintain modesty in their own dress and behavior.
So it's a community-wide principle aimed at fostering respect.
Precisely. Though Sajid does add a nuance, acknowledging that because society often targets women more with objectification, the protection is more visibly directed to them. It acknowledges a social reality without undermining the universal principle.
That's a lot to think about. For you listening, consider that perspective. Does framing modesty and hijab as protection and a way to guard dignity resonate differently than seeing it purely as restriction? What shapes your feeling on that?
It definitely encourages looking beyond just the surface. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Sajid doesn't just talk philosophy. He brings in history. This is where, for me, it gets really powerful. He talks about the Prophet Muhammad's own teachings and the roles women played right at the beginning of Islam. How does this historical lens add to the picture? Oh, this part of the source material is incredibly impactful. Sajid recounts a very famous teaching, a hadith, of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. A companion asks him, essentially, who deserves my best treatment? Who should I honor most? And the Prophet replies, your mother. The companion asks again, then who? The Prophet repeats, your mother. Yes, it's the third time, then who? And again, the Prophet says, your mother. Only after emphasizing the mother 3 times does he then say, then your father.
3 times for the mother.
3 times. And Sajid then poses this really compelling question straight from the source. Could a religion that honors motherhood that highly that puts such incredible emphasis on respecting the mother truly be inherently unjust to women? It makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It really does, and he backs this up with examples.
Concrete examples. He talks about Khadijah, the prophet's first wife. She wasn't just the wife, she was a highly successful, respected businesswoman before she even married him, a major merchant in Mecca. Then there's Aisha, another wife of the prophet. She became one of the most important scholars in early Islam. She narrated thousands of hadith, those sayings and actions of the prophet that formed the basis of Islamic law and practice. And she didn't just narrate them, she interpreted them. She taught large groups of both men and women. An intellectual powerhouse.
Wow. And not just scholars and businesswomen.
No. He also mentioned Nusayba bint Ka'b. She was known for her bravery in battle, literally fighting alongside the men and defending the prophet himself during the Battle of Uhud. A warrior.
So these women weren't exceptions or footnotes. They were central figures, leaders, scholars, entrepreneurs, defenders, foundational to the community.
Absolutely. Their stories provide such a strong counter-narrative to the stereotype of passive, sidelined women in early Islam. It just wasn't the reality, according to these accounts.
So for you, our listener, again, take a moment. Think about these figures. Khadijah the merchant, Aisha the scholar, Nusayba the warrior. How do their real historical roles challenge maybe some common ideas you've encountered about women's place in Islam? History is rarely... The hijab philosophy, the historical examples together. Sajid offers a concluding distinction that really seems to encapsulate the core argument. It circles back to that idea of equality. What's the final takeaway here?
The core argument, as Arif Azad presents it through Sajid, lands on this fundamental distinction. Islam provides equity, not necessarily forced, identical equality.
Equity, not equality. Explain that difference in this context.
Well, the reasoning presented is that men and women, while equal in spiritual worth and human dignity before God, are not identical. They have biological differences, perhaps different emotional leanings, and as we discussed, different societal roles and responsibilities assigned within this framework. Therefore, the argument goes, Islam provides what is best suited for each gender to thrive and fulfill their potential within those roles, rather than just applying a blanket, one-size-fits-all rule that looks equal on paper, but might not actually serve everyone fairly or effectively.
Like giving different tools for different jobs, maybe?
That's a good way to put it. It's about providing what's needed for each to function optimally, individually and collectively, creating balance, not about making everyone the same.
And the source concludes this approach is...
Sajid's final word on it, as relayed by Azad, is powerful. This careful differentiation, this equity-based approach, is not oppression, that is wisdom. It's presented as a divinely ordained system designed for harmony and justice, even if it looks different from modern Western notions of identical equality.
That's a profound reframing. It really challenges us to think about what fairness truly means. So for you listening one last time here, consider that difference between equality sameness and equity fairness tailored to need or role. How might thinking about that distinction change how you view other debates, maybe in politics or social issues, or even your own relationships? It's a concept with really broad application. And just like that, wow, we've covered a lot of ground, journeying through some incredibly complex, often sensitive questions about women and Islam. We've looked at how preconceived notions can be challenged by digging into context, philosophy, and history, all thanks to the nuanced explanations drawn from Arif Azad's Paradoxical Sajid. His thoughtful approach is really quite something.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, the source ends on such a human note. The student, after hearing Sajid out, she doesn't suddenly convert or agree with everything instantly, but it says something inside her softens. There's a moment of reflection. It captures that feeling. Perhaps not every answer is complete, but every answer deserves a chance. And that's really the invitation to all of us, isn't it? To keep exploring, keep questioning, but also keep listening with an open mind, especially on difficult topics.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought we'd like to leave you with today. If exploring these perspectives, even the ones that might feel challenging or unfamiliar, made you think or feel or question things a bit more deeply, what other areas of life, what other challenging topics could benefit from that same openness? And maybe, just maybe, echoing that final thought from the source, what if you discovered that a system or an idea you once thought was working against you was actually designed in its own way for you? What would that realization change about your world? Something to ponder. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll stay curious, stay